Again, I'm Susan Bass, Vice President of Women of Reformed Judaism, and it is my delight today to introduce the presenter for this workshop. I could stand here and read you the things that are in your program, and I'm not going to. Suffice to say that Dr. Carole Balin is a delightful, incredibly informative presenter. I met Carole and worked with her on the Reformed Jewish think tank, which we started in November of 2010. Yes, and always found Carole's perspective and ideas to really bring a new facet to whatever our discussions were on. Carole is currently a teacher of history at HUC and is just a wealth of information. Today, obviously, the topic is Uniongrams, and I want to thank those of you in the room who already know what Uniongrams are. They are obviously a major piece of the Yes Fund. We're going to learn a lot more about it. And Carole, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. So thanks for coming. So we're going to have fun. We've got a nice small group so we can really interact, and that's what I hope we'll do. This topic is so much fun. I just have to give a plug for Uniongrams.
Feel free.
Yeah, might as well, right? But the history is packed with a powerful historic punch. I took on this topic as one of the chapters from the book that we're publishing. It will be out the biennial. There are cards that will go around, that are going around, that look like this. But the book contains articles by Pam Adele, Jonathan Sarna, myself, and others. And I chose the topic of Uniongram because it just seems so charming and so interesting to me. And I love the visual part of it and what could be learned from it. But I will tell you, and you'll know by the end of the session, I hope, how important the Uniongrams are in terms of the history of the women of Reformed Judaism and what they signify. So the way that we're set up technically, I'm going to be dancing a lot, sort of back and forth. I don't like to be behind something, but I will, and I don't want to be crammed into the corner. So because this is where the screen is, if you are not in a place where you can see it, please feel free to move up at any point. So get the Uniongram habit. That originates. Here we are. Let's just make sure. Yeah. So this originates from a woman named Bertha, Mrs. Isaac, right? We've got, like we described a few minutes ago, Carrie Simon, Mrs. Simon. Mrs. Isaac born, whose name was Bertha, who was the chair of the National Committee on Uniongram in 1924. She said, "When my friends ask me to account for the large increase in sales of Uniongrams that occurs from year to year, I always tell them that using Uniongrams is like eating olives and artichokes. You have to acquire the habit." So Bertha Bourne almost single-handedly was responsible for this huge jump in sales over the time of her tenure. But before we get to that, I want to go backward and talk about how this originated, where they got their name, what they look like. I have some pictures from vintage, from earlier years. And first I want to create a scene for you. So imagine, spring day, circa 1923. Cleveland's Euclid Avenue system. Euclid Avenue was the forerunner to URJ's Chesed Fairmont Temple. Everybody have to be from?
Big.
Okay, oh good. Okay, we've got our representative. We've been there. But no rep, well, at least in our room. So imagine you're gathered around long tables strewn with lavender and gray crepe runners, and you're about to watch a unique performance. A large hanging blanket, gray blanket, is used as the backdrop in lavender. Of course, these are the signature colors we'll learn of the original Uniongram. Well, not really, there was one before that I talked about. But spelled out in 9 letters, Uniongram on this blanket that hung on a stage wall. On either side of this blanket, or you have to use your imagination here and bring in, candelabras, elaborate candelabras with on tablecloth strewn pedestals. And in March, 9 little Uniongram fairies, dressed in gray and lavender. They are obviously coordinating with the colors of the telegram substitute. They march onto the stage, this is in 1923, they march onto the stage to the tune of Parade of the Wooden Soldiers, and they begin with an opening song called Now is the Time to Buy Uniongrams. This is real, this really happened. Then the fairies began to expand on the Uniongrams' purpose. And they do this by reciting a 9-couplet poem, beginning with the letter U. U stands for unity, emblem of strength, precious your inheritance, guarded at length. At the end of the performance, the fairies take a bow, they rush off the stage. Such, what the Sisterhood Minutes called, new and novel stunts and programs really became the backbone of the fundraising campaign for the Uniongrams. And it goes on, and I will tell you more about it. So what is the Uniongram? Originally, I'm gathering, let's talk about it for a second. I mean, what is a Uniongram today? And then I'll describe, what I know of the history. Somebody just spell out what it is and how it's used today?
How it's used today?
Yes. Will you remind me your name?
I'm Wendy Adams, Clearwater, Florida, Pennsylvania. The Uniongrams that lots of us still use now, because not everybody does electronic meeting notices, is sending it out on, using it as a meeting notice, using it as invitations to any affair, and of course still thank you and some.
Okay, so it's a blank, right? Blank card,
Blank
it's
card.
decorated,
Yeah.
a blank card, right?
Right.
With a message on it. We're going to look at the one today.
And where the money from the
And the
Uniongram goes.
Right, so you pay a certain amount of money, and it's used to fund local women who reform Judaism chapters and all the rest, right? So originally, it was perceived as a telegram substitute. However, it wasn't a telegram ever that was sent over the wires, right? It was always something that was mailed. It came originally with a blank card that was decorated, a typewritten message, typewritten out for you, an envelope, and the postage was all included. So it really functioned like a greeting card in the beginning, and in effect today. It's a stationery. It was originally used for joyous occasions. It was not used for donations in memory of somebody. That came a little bit later in its history. It was beginning just for joyous occasions, and it quickly, within a year, evolved into a catch-all kind of note card, whether it be for condolences, for anniversaries. And over time, it was used for confirmations, bar bat mitzvah, all kinds of congratulatory messages and messages of sympathy. Originally, it was perceived as being sent only Jew to Jew. It was not thought that it would be sent out to the wide world beyond the Jewish community. And under Bertha Bourne, Bertha's our one who said acquired the Uniongram habit, under her tutelage, a big, huge campaign started around buying Uniongrams or selling Uniongrams for Mother's Day. What they would do is, and I found these instructions, it's unbelievable. They would ask their sisterhood members, and we're still in sisterhood at that time, we'll talk about the shift to women in Reform Judaism, the name changed later. At that time, in the 1920s, they would hold these meetings to train sisterhood members to go into the synagogues on Sundays during Sunday school and encourage the kids to buy Uniongrams. And it was, the directions were so meticulous. I've always admired that about women in general, but women in Reform Judaism, wow. If there's going to be an event, every T will be crossed. I will be dotted, and I know that just sitting downstairs and seeing those lovely centerpieces and what went into the ribbons and the colors, and it comes out in spades in this campaign. But one of the instructions was to tell children that they should keep it a secret. Right? You don't want to tell your mother that you're buying a Uniongram for her. So you were supposed to collect pennies around the house. Don't tell your mother. And just like your mother does lots of nice things for you, you should learn how to do this. It's guilt-induced, And sure enough, they ran these campaigns where the kids would collect their money and bring them into synagogue, their temple local school the next week, and they would buy them and then hand them out. But place it, make a breakfast for her, and place it on the table beside the breakfast. All kinds of very significant instructions. In 1940, even, there was a campaign to create a Uniongram Day. I don't know if that still exists on the WRJ calendar, but on that day, every member was asked to buy at least one Uniongram, and that earned a lot of money at the time. So the Uniongram appears early in the annals of sisterhood history. Namely, already in 1913, right after the founding meeting, there was talk about creating some kind of mechanism to raise funds. And the executive committee, after the first initial founding with the 55 members that Pam McDell spoke about, the executive committee met right after that and decided to add a 7th standing committee. They had standing committees on what they call propaganda, which was sort of membership. There was a standing committee on synagogue life, there was one on art museums, but they were only 6 at the time, they added a 7th. That's how important the Uniongram was. They created a national committee on Uniongrams. Even before the next biennial in 1915, the executive committee of NFTS signed an agreement to print 20,000 blank cards. So they're already sort of on the roll, even before 1915. So if somebody asks when the Uniongram was started, I mean, basically it was 1913, at least the green line was here, because I've been asked that before. President Carrie Simon at the time, in 1914-15, when they started to roll out the Uniongram, said, the Uniongram will become a permanent, like a prophet, a permanent and pleasurable institution in our midst for helping to increase the funds of the National Federation. And indeed, Simon's dream has been realized in spades. From 1913 to 1953, which are the years I studied on this question. Why? Because in 1953, the National Committee of Uniongrams will be subsumed under a development committee that the WRJ creates at FDS at the time, called the Department of Advancement of Judaism. So in those 40 years, 1913 to 1953, more than 3 million Uniongrams were sold. That's incredible to me. And this is the time right before the internet, before the kinds of TV, whatever, TV was just starting on, becoming more popular. So in that time frame, those 40 years, the Uniongrams raised more than $500,000, so $500,000. When the, let's go to the, it's okay, Susan. So this, I know it's hard to read it, I hope you'll get the book, and, this chart is in the book that I described in Centennial History of Reform Judaism. But just to point out a few years, this is a double chart, you see the year and how many were sold. So the first year when they were rolled out, 1915, about 2,500. The next year already, well, it was marked for 2 years after that. They were up to 9,536. There was a little dip, but you see by 1920 they're selling 13,000 a year, and 22,000, 32,000. It's this exponential growth over time. Even during World War World War II, the numbers are still remaining really high. 57,000, 65,000. America enters the war, 70,000, 89,000, becomes even more popular at a time. Or if you look at the Depression years also, they're still maintaining the numbers, which is really quite remarkable. So the question becomes to me, I also want to say one other thing. You may know this, but at the dedication ceremony of the House of Living Judaism, where they're talking about next door with Jane Evans, the house that Jane built, at the dedication ceremony, in the cornerstone, Jane Evans put the Uniongram. So that's how crucial it was. And in fact, Uniongrams helped to fund that project, which cost millions of dollars. And this is just one of the fundraising efforts, right, on the part of sisterhood. Just really incredible. So my question, the time we have remaining, this is one of the booths, that's okay. We'll go to this in a minute. But my questions are the following. How was it that American Jewish women, who presumably had little to no training in business, right, whatsoever, except you could argue their household incomes, household maintenance and budgeting, how did they manage to stage such a fruitful fundraising campaign? 3 million sold in 40 years. They start selling them before women could vote, right? 1915, 4 years before women could vote. Other questions. What means were established to raise sales year after year? Why were the Uniongrams so popular? And finally, beyond the nuts and bolts of how the Uniongram campaign worked and operated, which I'm going to describe to you, we'll look at some art and how it was done, how did their selling of Uniongrams compare to other women's lib organizations of the day who might have been selling those? It's really interesting. Over time, over time, there'll be copycats. Other organizations will copy the Uniongram. The most famous and obvious example is the Women's League of Conservative Judaism. They create something called the League Grant. mimicry is a form of flattery, right? And that's, in Western Union, you will see, will even create a Rosh Hashanah telegram based, I gotta imagine it had something to do with the knowledge. So let me stop for a minute, see if there are questions, and then we'll march on to Karen. Is this
Karen. Somewhere here.
Karen.
Karen. As you say, New York. I say Karen from the Midwest.
Okay.
Where did the name come from?
That's where I'm going. So it's exactly where I'm going. So the name, what is it? Where did it come from? Hi, welcome. Let me talk first about the mother of Uniongrams, who created this. A woman named Blanche Rauh, R-A-U-H, was her name, former name Stoltz, who lived from 1863 to 1950s. Now, on her 85th birthday, Blanche Stoltz was given the title of honorific Mother of Uniongrams. And on her 85th birthday at the WRJ Biennial that year, she received 2,600 Uniongrams from Rabbi.
Wow.
2,600. There's actually a prize named in her memory. I don't know if it's still given out, but for selling the most of whatever.
Absolutely.
She had very deep roots in the Reform movement. Her parents and grandparents were members of Cincinnati's Plum Street Temple, which is I.M. Wise's temple. She had good yichus. In other words, I.M. Wise himself, the founder of Reform Judaism, confirmed her and confirmed her mother. And what's so interesting to me is Blanche Stoltz took classes at Union College in Cincinnati. She was not interested in becoming a rabbi, but she talked about walking home with the boys and having conversations. You may or may not know that in the beginning of its history, 1875 to about the 1920s, even longer than that, HUC high school, and then also college and graduate school. So they really were boys. Blanche, surprise, surprise, met her husband among these boys, and she married, what's his first name? He's named Joseph. She met her husband, who was in the second graduating class of rabbis.
Wow.
The two of them were married in 1890, and they moved to Chicago. And in Chicago, she became very active in social causes. She joined the Chicago Jewish Charities, which is the antecedent to Jewish Federation, we know of as today. She was a member of what was known as the Johanna Lodge of the United Order of True Sisters. The United Order of True Sisters is really the first Jewish women's organization, even before the National Council of Jewish Women. She became very active in that. And eventually she'll rise, she was a leader in National Council of Jewish Women, and then she'll found, she becomes a recording secretary of a sisterhood organization at her husband's synagogue in Chicago. She eventually will get on the national board. And what happens is, at the time, Erwin Zeppin, Z-E-P-I-N, was the executive director of the National Federation of Temple Sisterhood. This was around when it was founded. There was no woman. In fact, it's so interesting when Pam Udell talked about, calling forth that women get together. Well, it didn't come from a woman. It came from Rabbi Friedberg, which she mentioned. And Friedberg's wife was Stella Friedberg, who then became the head of the National Committee of the Uniongram also. So it's really interesting the role Revinson, played, as Rabbi's wives played in the beginnings of NFTS. So here's Blanche Stoltz, the rabbi's wife. So, and she says to Erwin one day, Erwin Zeppin, who's like I said, the executive director, like the Barbara Collins today, she says to him, I remember from my husband's synagogue, there was this young couple, they got married, they're from Germany, and they're members of our congregation, and I remember when they got married, they had lots of note cards came to them from the US, from Germany over to here, and they were all matching, but they had different messages. So she knew of that. It was around the time the telegram was becoming available, and so they created, from her idea, Erwin Zeppin said, hey, that's a good idea, let's create some kind of card, and they called it a Uniongram. Now obviously the gram part is because of the telegram, right? Western Union was taking off, but I'm going to talk about the pricing in a minute. Western Union telegrams were far more expensive than sending mail, including the Uniongram. And later on, I read in some of the Sisterhood Minutes that they liked calling it Uniongram because the money that they were collecting for the Uniongrams originally were used for two purposes. One, and primarily in the beginning, for what they called free religious schools. Free meaning anybody could join. It was really for impoverished Jewish children in some of the major metropolitan areas so that they could come to religious school. But it turns out that that wasn't the need in many, many places, these suburbs, or wherever the sisterhood chapters were. So then they started to channel the money to HUC-JIR, Hebrew College Jewish Religion. And this, like that maternalism that Hammy Dell spoke about, these were their sons, right? This is like their boys, and they were giving money to boys. And so later on in the literature it says the U in Uniongram is the heart, after all, of HUC, right? The way it's spelled, right? And a gram is the smallest amount possible. So that was something that, sort of took on. They had very fortuitous timing. I don't know if it was the timing or they just knew, again, that's what savvy business sense. This was just around the time that Americans, not just Jews, but Americans began to send greeting cards. In fact, it was in let me put my hand on it, not seeing it right now, but in the 19-teens, in 1912, 1913, two brothers named Hall came together with their famous mark and created postcards, the Hallmark brothers. And that started to take off, and the greeting cards became a common way to greet friends, especially also, remember, this is a time when people are moving more, right? The what's it called, manifest destiny, and moving beyond even the East Coast. So the women hopped on this train, so to speak, and created this stationery to be used and to raise money, and also for a practical purpose. And really, when you think about it, what they were doing is blending practicalism or pragmatism and philanthropy. Like not only it was usable, and you were doing it for a good cause. So not only did the recipient get a nice thing, but the donor did. You felt good about what you were doing. It's a really brilliant marketing strategy and idea, I think, to create these Uniongrams. Just to give you a little background here, the steamboat came about in 1811. The railroad, this is in the United States, in 1832. Pony Express, which was really important for mail, 1860 to 63, right? And then it's the Civil War, right? And so you can see it marching forward. And then airmail was created in 1918. So this precedes airmail. Wow. These Uniongrams in the beginning, right, are going by train, or ponies even, to these more outer line areas. Pricing. I alluded, the telegram was expensive. To send a Western Union telegram in 1919, right, so like 4 years after the campaign began, that was the year they sold. There was discrepancy in records, but roughly 7,400 Uniongrams. In 1919, to send a telegram cost 60 cents for a 10-word telegram.
Wow.
Remember, we just heard dues were 5 cents, 10 cents a dime. So it cost 60 cents to send a telegram in 1919. And that was between wars. It's not a prosperous time necessarily. You could place a long-distance call at that time, but it was really, really complicated. It took forever. And I remember just even watching TV shows from that era, right, or movies where they're like calling up, and the Broadway shows, it's all kinds of references. The postage rate to deliver a letter between, I have here, across the United States, basically from New York to Chicago, just to give some sense, was between 2 and 3 cents, all the way from 1913 to 1915. So in the years I'm talking about, the postage rate was only 2 or 3 cents the entire 40 years. It never went up. By the way, it rose in 1958 to 4 cents. So postage has always been, think of today.
It's still cheap.
Right, it's still cheap, even though it goes up every day.
Yeah.
You track those. So the Uniongram, in terms of its cost, in its initial public offering, was offered for a quarter. It cost 25 cents for a Uniongram. And you think, that's not so cheap, right? Because it's 2 to 3 cents for postage. The postage was included, and an envelope, and the pretty card, and somebody else typed it. And what you would do, it had nothing to do with telegrams or over the wires, you would call your local sisterhood secretary, and she would type it up and send it. And I know to this day that, that still happens in some places. Yes, it's a question.
Do you know when they stopped including postage?
I don't. Do you?
No,
Oh,
I'm
maybe
wondering.
you do. I don't know.
I wonder if it went up to the 4 or 5 cents in the 50s. I wonder.
And I really only studied up to 1953 because that's when the community became defunct, and I needed an endpoint in really all the juicy beginnings that comes here. It'd be an interesting question to ask. I know, and I'll talk about e-cars, emerged 2000 or so, maybe even later than that, because there's later. So it's a later development. So, the price held steady. That 25 cents held steady until 1953. Despite the fact that in 1953, a dollar in 1913, when they first came out, was equal in 1953 to $2.70. In other words, despite inflation, they kept the price low. What would happen is, for each Uniongram, you pay 25 cents, and 20 of it would come back to the local sisterhood for causes, local causes. And the local cause was fundraising for the school. In other words, each local sisterhood never kept the money for themselves. They would then donate, but they got to distribute it. So it became, and you'll see, I'm going to talk about this competition, in fact, among these different sisterhoods to raise money. And then 5 cents went to cover the expenses. For the most part, the money was used, like I said, funneled back to fund boys, basically, and then the HUC.
So NFTS wasn't making money on this, but the local affiliates were.
That's right. So when they wanted to build, for example, a dormitory at the Cincinnati campus, they used Uniongram funds. When they wanted to fund during right before World War II, and even into a few years of World War II, when refugees were trying to get over here, and HUC was really instrumental in bringing over not only scholars but young men who wanted to escape Germany. They came to HUC and scholarships were given. In every case, it was a man or a boy who benefited from the monies of the Uniongrams, except one that they came across. There was a woman named Johanna Spector who came over in 1943 to study at HUC-JIR, not the Rabbi, to get a Ph.D. in musicology. And she was funded by the Uniongrams. The only record, and I'm going to come back to this at the end. It's really interesting about where the money goes. And during the war, like 41, 42, I have it in my notes to know precisely. It's in the article too. So I want to point out, in the beginning, when the Uniongrams began to be sold, right, in 1913, 1914, 1915, through the 20s, generally the Jewish fundraising didn't run through marketing and sale of products. Think about it. Even today, generally speaking, we fundraise by going to very wealthy potential donors and asking them to give money. And it's very effective. Or a second way is to hold a gala or a benefit, right? But neither of those, except for the donor himself, who gets his name maybe on it, or her name on a building or what have you, for the most part, you don't have something to show for it, so to speak. What is ingenious here is there's something you can hold in your hand. And like I said, you get a feel-good buzz from it, right? You send it to your friend, and I mean, I'm not in any way being flippant. I mean, it really is a practical product that differentiates it from all Jewish fundraising at that time. So NFTS really, and WRJ can take credit for inventing for the Jewish world this kind of sale and this kind of fundraising mechanism, which is really extraordinary. I'm going to talk more about that business acumen. The next slide shows in 1950, this is a Uniongram booth. And again, that it's a product, right? This was taken, it's not a great photo, I'm afraid. Again, it's in the book, you can see it better. But this says by Uniongrams, and this says support, and I think it's Hebrew Union College or something like the HUC, and mentioning. But this was held, this is in Daytona, Florida, at a university for black children, African Americans in 1950, where a woman from the NAACP was giving a talk, and the local chapter of Sisterhood was co-sponsoring this event. Talk about politics. I would say that NFTS has been, I respectfully disagree with my colleague downstairs. NFTS has been in the forefront of a lot of change. We'll hear about journalism later. But anyway, in 1950, so there's this speech is going to be given. It's at this local university, and there's a Uniongram booth. So it's just, it's remarkable. And, I went down before, or, during the breakfast this morning, and it went right over to like where the art calendars are and the pins. To this day, it continues on some level. I mean, it's remarkable. So, the innovation did not end with the product itself, and here I have Susan Pillman to thank on the next slide. Not only did they sell the pins and earn, $500,000, but they took the pins and recycled them, right? Before Green America, right? They took the pins, these are Uniongrams, and so they got Uniongram here, Uniongram, these are older ones, thank you, Susan Pillman.
We still do that.
We still, I
At the
love it.
Washington Assembly,
Really?
they made flowers.
We tried to find a record of when it began, and the earliest we could date was Baltimore 1991.
And that's probably about right.
Yeah?
It was either Baltimore 91 or New Orleans 89, it was one of those two.
So if we find a record, I'd love to know, but Susan was kind enough to send these to me, and, we took a shot at them. They're just, an idea that, and of course you'd sell them again, right? So you're reselling what you already sold. I mean, it's just, I don't know what they went for. Susan, you told me at one point.
Usually
$5. So you sold it for, whatever, until, it's just great.
I just want them for gifts if you're assistant president or your officers.
You bring it for your chapter, or your board. I love it. I just love it. I love the whole idea of it. One or two of those are now permanently, thanks to Susan, at the AJA in Cincinnati, the American Jewish Archives. So let's talk about what it looked like. If you can go to, so like any good merchandise, right? It had to be pretty. So what did it look like? So if you don't mind, Susan, next slide. So this was the standard Uniongram from 1920 to 1934. It began 5 years before that. I found a Uniongram in the AJA archives from Carrie Simon to her executive board, wishing them a good Yonzer, a Rosh Hashanah. It was orange, right, like this color. Well, this, well, not quite. I wore lavender polish in honor of these lavender. Orange was the original. But originally they were orange. And then they took this color, I'll describe it in a minute. So they had to attract customers, and the design changed with the zeitgeist, right? Like Vogue, like Women's Wear Daily, here the Uniongram changed, and you can tell a lot about it. So this became the standard bearer for 14 years, as you can see. I'm going to show you ones that came after, but let's look at the illustration, the decoration here. What is it telling us? This Uniongram combines elements of fiduciac, that is artwork, faux arts, what's normally called now Art Deco, and Judaism. What do you see here, right? We're going to get to it much more so in a moment. The word Uniongram appears here, right? If we can go ahead for 1 minute, just watch, see how this undulates? Okay, let's go to the next one. Here's Western Union. This is from, where's the date? It doesn't have a date, I'm afraid. Well, this is one from Woodrow Wilson. This is, see this type, the type, Western Union Telegram, and notice this undulating, if we can go back for a minute. Whoops, the other way? Yeah. It just, I don't know, who bought what bar, or what. Okay, so what you have here are, right, you have these menorahs, right? And the menorahs are not Hanukkah, right? They're seven, well, sort of 8, if you get, you count. What happens is there's a divide in the middle, and these flames come up, and they have within them above David and Star David, and the NFTS emblem in the middle. Note how little of NFTS is represented here. I think it's really interesting. I think it says something about that self-effacing quality, this even subordinate position on the part of these women really early on. This is from 1923. They marked everything in the archives. This was sent to the executive board members. It says, for September 23rd, Baltimore, Maryland. For the holiday season, accept my good wishes for you and yours. I trust that you will be given the strength to continue your fine work for the organization so dear to us all. Mrs. Joseph Wiesenfeld, or Patty, and then she gives her address. She was the chairman of the National Committee on the Uniongrams then.
So when you described the skips that they did,
Yes.
was this the time, that's why they
That's
had the numbers on the?
Yeah,
each of the-
exactly. They were replicating. Thank you for bringing that up. That was the scenery. It was the backdrop was a Uniongram, and then these little areas here.
Was that purple? It's hard to see.
Yes,
but
it's like
so-
lavenderish,
Yeah.
this looks like eggplanty, it was more lavenderish, for sure. When you look, they're yellow, in the archives, but this is a pretty good representation. But I just want to point out, so you have this elaborate sort of ornate, very Art Deco-ish, go to Carnegie Hall's a good example, the Chrysler Building, Temple Emmanuel's lobby on Fifth Avenue, you know, that kind of, not to mention all these every rough co-ops around the city. But, you know, it's it's got a real Art Deco feel. I don't know who designed it, I did quite a lot of research and just could not come up with it, but it's distinctly Jewish. I think it's really important to say. Now, I don't know, I speculate, the fact that it's a menorah might be significant for Reform Jews because of we go forward.
Question. Go back a second.
Yeah.
What is that? Something is the.
Oh, thank you. Speech is the messenger of the heart. Thank you. This appears on today's Union, in 2013. So what this is a Talmudic expression. I looked it up. You can't find it. What happens is, in the 19-teens, there are books that come out, written by rabbis, of like sayings that can be used, Jewish sayings, and they don't identify where they come from, but this is in those books. I found it in 2 places in these books in the 19-teens. But speech is the messenger of the heart, which is of course perfect, right, for this Uniongram. I don't know what the decision was about keeping that motto for the years, but thanks for noticing that, Mary. So if we go forward too, this is the Arch of Titus, right? Now this is, a very, very famous sculpture, it's in Rome, right outside the Colosseum. There's another replica, or a piece of it, I think maybe in Britain, in one of the London museums. I don't know for sure. This is my speculation. So this is a scene from after the Second Temple was destroyed and the Roman soldiers are carrying the booty out of the temple. The menorah is, sort of the symbol of that temple. But what's interesting is it's being brought out of Jerusalem, right? They're taking it to Rome. This was, for Reformed Jews, right, the destruction of the Second Temple is a mixed blessing in some ways, right? Because it led to, yes, the fall of the temple, the sacrificial cult, but it led to the creation of Judaism in the diaspora writ large. So I don't know, I'm just speculating maybe, but the menorah, whatever it is a really important symbol. So if we go back again, so these I just wanted to show because to get the flavor of what they look like and how similar in some ways they were, but with their own stamp. Let's see. Let's go forward a few here. We'll go to, okay, this is 1934. So on April 12, 1934, a new design was unveiled. The National Committee on Uniongram Chair said, the Uniongram, this is April, just think April for a minute, it's Pesach and it's Easter time. The Uniongram is going forth in a different dress and bonnet, just in time for the many important occasions of spring on which we'll use it. I don't know about you, I don't know many people who wear bonnets to Passover Seder. I know a lot of people who wear them for Easter, right? So it's really interesting. And here, the image changes, right? Rather than having the 2 menorah, right, flanking either side, you have one here, and then on the other side, you have something that to me looks like a postal stamp, right? And it's registered with the NFTS logo, or insignia, emblem. Notice Uniongram is in all small, lowercase. But here, speech is messenger of the heart. It gets broader play, and it's all caps. This is a perfect example of Bauhaus art of the 1930s. Of course,
Carole is citing the Talmud for that.
Yeah, and it did on the other one too.
Oh.
But I couldn't find the actual reference.
Yeah.
However, it was translated, I'm sure it's in the Talmud, but it's translated in such a way that it's masked. I'm not a Talmudist, and maybe somebody else would know off the top of his head, or but yeah, I think it harkens back to those books, those compilations, not necessarily the Talmud, which is a very American thing, in some ways.
Were these put in an envelope or were they
Yes.
like postcards?
No, it's put in an
Oh, it's
envelope
put in
and, like similar in stationery, right? So here's, 2, because presumably, right, that's why, this is made to look like a postcard, so you've got the imagery, but it's really, right, it goes in an envelope. So this is Joe Stella Ehrenfeld, who was also, at one time a chair. So this is a perfect example, or a paragon of Bauhaus art. Bauhaus was, in the 1930s in Germany, was destroyed, basically, that whole movement by the Nazis. But here it is, 1934. This is pre-World War II, right? But borrowing from that European German, the very straight lines. Bauhaus is all about angles. Because this menorah is all about, right angles. Also, Bauhaus is known for using all of one case, either uppercase or lowercase. So it's really interesting the way you can see how the style changes, right? And the Uniongrams changes with it over time. So this is far simpler than its predecessor, in terms of the design. It's easier to read. It's like this abstract version of candles. I'm sure there was some symbolism there that I loved it. If you go back for a second to the other one, I love this one in that the flames are all leading upward toward the MTS. I love that symbolism. But it's changed. Aesthetics change over time to the point. But anyway, so here you have this one from 1934. Let's see, where do we go? The Uniongram today, which is the next slide, very simple, right? But again, words from the heart, not speech from the heart. Words from the heart go to the heart. It's different. It's slightly different, and it just says Talmud. Now, this again is a Reformed Judaism thing. If this were sent by an Orthodox group of women, would it cite the reference? Would it, what? It's just interesting to know. Yeah, the tractate. Look at the simplicity here, and what do you note here? What do you see in this example? Where's the Jewish part?
It's not there.
There's nothing Jewish about it unless you understand what Talmud means. There's nothing Jewish. Now, WRJ, it's lovely. I think this is beautiful. But it's so simple. It's so dressed down. Of course, emails and all the rest, cards came out since then. These are not as widely used policies and instruments.
Actually, prior to this one, they were very, very plain, let's wear just
Blue
line, just one color, and
Right, you could do a whole study just looking at the designs over the years and learn quite a bit. I think it's really important. The color, the leaf, it's got a feminine quality, which I find very appealing. I don't know what went into it. I don't know if they just hired a graphic designer and then posted it up, but this
There was a whole rebranding.
Okay,
so
so
yeah,
because it managed the
and all of
website and all
that.
the
Yeah.
rest, so I would imagine.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
10 years, yeah. So it's very interesting. So there's more to say here about this product.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about Bertha Bourne. She's our artichoke and olive lady from the beginning, where you've got to get the Uniongram habit. She is unbelievable. There's a very famous letter of Moses Maimonides where he actually writes about what he's done in a day, and it's like, it takes your breath away. He saw 5 patients, he was a physician. He traveled a mile to study Talmud with somebody, he came back, he met with a local council, all in a day's work, right? Listen to Bertha Bourne, what she did in her lifetime. So Bertha Bourne was described by her male contemporary as, quote, a paradigm of modern, progressive, and aggressive womanhood. Progressive and aggressive womanhood. It's interesting. She went to high school in Rockport, Indiana, and then she went to finishing school, and then she married an attorney, not a rabbi. So it's not always right, the rabbis and the rabbis of life. She married Isaac Bourne in 1896. The couple moved to Indianapolis in 1910, and she raised 2 children, and she was what, again, her contemporary called zealous in her performance of civic duty. And let me read to you what she did. She was committed to, she was a staunch Democrat, she participated in the Girl Scout movement, she was a director of the Little Theater Society in Indianapolis, she was a volunteer during World War I, not in the war, but in the war efforts. She was chair of the Red Cross shop that was set up in the local department store to give out aid to veterans. She chaired the Americanization Committee of the State Federation of Women's Clubs. She was the state chair of the Women's Foreign Division of the Victory Loan Campaign. She was Indiana State's president of Sisterhood and a member of the NFTS board for 10 years. It sounds like the resume of women sitting here in this room, and I know it. At the same time, she was involved in the suffrage movement. This is, again, related to what we were talking about before. She rose to become the president of the Women's Franchise League in Indiana, which is basically the suffrage movement. Like other women of her class, she was committed to this work outside her home for no pay. And there's a scholar who calls the work these women did their invisible careers. And that's what they did, and it was like on-the-job training, right? Put, into the fire, into the flame, it's just on-the-job training. Never recognized quite that way like a professional woman would with a paycheck coming monthly or what have you. So she did this work out of her own heart, and she was the National Committee of Uniongram chair from 1921 to 34. And under her, that's when I showed you on the chart, I had it. Uniongram sales jumped from $3,000 per year to $12,000 a year. And that's a lot of Uniograms for 25 cents a pop, right, when you think about it. I mean, the number sounds kind of not so much to us, but when you think about what their product is, what they're paying, we gotta add a lot of orders to get there. Her secret weapon, what I call her secret weapon, was competition, which to me is very unladylike. I just want to point this out. She would hold a contest whereby local sisterhoods would send in their ideas to sell Uniograms, like these little playlets that they opened with, the fairies, and then they'd have a competition who won. And if you won, you got put into like a brochure that then went to all like best practices. It would be sent around to all the sisterhood chapters. Not only that, she then created at the biennial meetings the prizes that would be given out for the sister who earned the most in Uniongram sales, or the chapter who won the most. And this, I think, holds today, right? That idea. And look at what Federation does, right? At their meetings where now someone gets up and says, I gave this, like this competitive edge came from ladies, right? Like gloves, right? I wore white gloves when I was in Sunday school in the 1970s. Like it's a different mentality, yet they were the most savvy business people on the block in some ways, but through these invisible careers, as one scholar calls it. So by the war's end, World War II's end, under Hartford Warren, we were selling 100,000 units a year. Like, it was just crazy numbers. I'm going to conclude with something, then leave time for whatever questions we have, or find maybe a lunch or whatever. I found it really instructive, as I said in the beginning, to compare. We go to the next slide. The women of Reform Judaism sales of Uniongrams to the sale of Girl Scout cookies. They are almost contemporaneous. It's remarkable. Right now, on the Mall in Washington is an exhibit of Girl Scouts of America, because they also celebrated 100th anniversary. Interesting. I can say more about it when I go. The Girl Scouts of America was
better sell
well,
those.
right? Are they? I don't know. But listen to the similarities and the differences. So the Girl Scouts of America was founded in 1915 by a woman named Juliet Gordon Lowe. It was based on the Boy Scouts, which had been founded in England. And I know the Boy Scouts get a lot of press right now. They ought to. The Girl Scouts was Juliet Lowe Gordon's idea. In 1917, a Girl Scout troop in, I have to look at how to say it, Muskogee, Oklahoma, baked and sold cookies in their cafeteria as a service project. This is in 1917, 2 years after the Girl Scouts were founded. This is in Oklahoma. Within 5 years, the national magazine of the Girl Scouts, which was called American Girl, which really? To do with the dog. Yeah.
Maybe the gal.
I don't know. They featured in their magazine a recipe for cookies. And with that recipe, they featured the following. They gave the cost of ingredients so that if you wanted to sell, like you'd have some idea. And they estimated it cost approximately 26 to 36 cents, approximately. It sounds kind of specific to me, to bake about 6 to 7 dozen cookies from start to finish. Wow. 26 to 36, 6 to 7 dozen. In the 1920s and 30s, Girl Scout troops in different parts of the country began to bake cookies, package them in those old-fashioned wax paper bags, put a Girl Scout sticker on it, and sell them door to door. But it did not become a national movement until 1936. It was the first nationally franchised cookie factory. I mean, I researched it's a business, right? I mean, I know it is now, but I mean, when you think even in early on, and you can look at ads and all that. So simultaneously, right, the cookie sales are coming up, the Uniongram sales are coming up. They're both products you can touch. It's remarkable to me. But I want to underscore 3 differences between the Uniongram campaign and the Girl Scout cookie campaign. Number 1, the cookies idea came from the trenches, right? Muskogee, Oklahoma, and then in these other little, right? And then it kind of percolated up to the top. Uniongrams the opposite. The executive board made a decision, right? It's very top down. It's generated by the leadership. And then in that National Committee of Uniongram, what did they do? They were constantly writing letters to the local committee of Uniongram chapter heads, telling them, here's more to do, and that playlet's moving. So that's the first difference. Second difference, the proceeds for the Girl Scout cookies went back to the local Girl Scout councils for their use, whether it was to buy, arts and crafts supplies or to raise money for the local whatever it was. But it went back to the organization, to the girls themselves, not Uniongrams, right? As I said, I can underscore it. The money went to boys and men, except for this one woman I got, Mrs. Spector. Third difference, skills. As early as 1931, Girl Scouts of America acknowledged in all their written pamphlets and what have you, that the cookie campaigns were meant to help develop girls' marketing and business potential. In other words, they were blatant about these careers. They made visible these invisible careers that our women of Reform Judaism sort of just let be under the radar, so to speak. It is not until, I would argue, after 1953, like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, when probably girls who had been Girl Scout themselves become leaders in the WRJ, right? That, in fact, it becomes sort of this push to professionalize and change the way we do business